Okay.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for spending your lunchtime hour with us today. My name is Elise Shadler, and I work for the Vermont Urban and Community Forestry Program, which is a collaborative program of the Vermont Department of Forests, Parks, and Recreation and the University of Vermont Extension. To find out more about our program, please visit www.vtcommunityforestry.org. This will be our final webinar of the 2015 season, so I thank you for joining us. Today's webinar presentation is titled EAB Management Considerations for Vermont Communities, and our presenter this afternoon is Mark Duntemann. Mark presented on this topic at the 2014 Vermont Tree Stewards Conference, and we thought it was so relevant and important to deserve an encore, and so today he's joining us from Chicago, where he lives. Mark founded Natural Path Urban Forestry Consultants in 1988. The firm's area of expertise is arboricultural maintenance and management policy development with an emphasis on tree risk assessment and tree risk management. Through this specialization, Mark has been an expert witness in dozens of tree-related injury and fatality cases. This experience informs his understanding of tree risk issues and also his work with EAB management in the Midwestern states. Mark has a Bachelor's of Science in Forest Resources from the University of Montana and a Master's in Urban Forestry from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He is an ISA Board Certified Master Arborist, an ISA Tree Risk Assessment Qualification Instructor, and a former tree warden for the city of Montpelier. Before we get started, Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few logistics. As participants, all of your microphones will be muted throughout the whole presentation, but as they arise, please use the chat box or the question function at the bottom of your GoToWebinar side panel to type in your questions. At the end of Mark's presentation, he will address the questions in the order in which they came in. At the end of the presentation, you will be asked to follow a link to a very short evaluation survey. Please fill this survey out so that we can continue to improve and guide our future webinars and programming. The webinar is being recorded and will be available on our website as a YouTube video at the beginning of next week. With that, I will give the floor to Mark, and here we go.
Thanks, Elise. Good afternoon, everyone. As Elise pointed out, as I go through this talk, anything that incites a question or you want more details on, you certainly fill out the questions prompt on your screen. And so this talk is on EAB management in a kind of in a Vermont context, and I'm going to talk initially about just our role in managing urban and community trees from more dense populated areas to the more traditional rural areas that we find in Vermont. And I'm going to draw on early on. I'm going to draw on some examples from the Chicago metro area where the area has been infested since 2006, and quite a large number of communities from heavy urban to very rural farm communities that are contending with EAB still today. And a lot of those choices, I think, will help inform some of the discussion that we'll have today. But also, I would like to draw in the context that is very, very specific to Vermont, and that is that population of ash trees that may reside in populated villages and towns, but also the probably the larger context of ash trees that will be found along the rural roads and town forests and things like that. So three definite areas of concern. So I'm going to start off by first saying that in general, the trees that we manage today are a function of all past policies. That's certainly so in the towns and communities we live in. Less so in more natural areas or areas where ash have self-seeded and grown. But at least in the context of the towns that we live in, from the green areas, the town greens, to the street trees and park trees that we manage, they are a function of all past policies. And a lot of the issues that we've run into with EAB, as an example, in the Midwest, is that the planting of ash trees certainly was done very heavily after the loss of so many American elms. And so in these urban and town context, a very small number of trees, species, ash, green ash initially, then white ash later, Norway maple, honey locust, American linden, little leaf linden, were planted in huge numbers in response to the loss of American elm. And for good or bad, I mean, one, replacing the lost canopy was certainly a positive thing, but when we're talking about only 4 or 5 species replacing the American elm, it still did not lend itself for a very diverse community forest. And part of the problems we have today with emerald ash borer are very much drawn to this planting or overuse of certain species as a result of Dutch elm disease. And so when I say we manage, the trees we manage today are a function of all past policies, this is certainly in a town and village setting. The trees that or the species we've selected, how they've been maintained, how they've been sited in the landscape, they all have, as they develop over the years, play a role that may be positive or negative, depending on our choices in the past. But, we're the managers today, and so we have to deal with the issues as they are presented to us. Most of us probably didn't plant, most of the people listening today, probably didn't plant most of the ash and other species that we have to deal with, but we have the responsibility to deal with it today. And the ash were planted for very good reasons. As I said, probably overplanted in certain places, and now we have to make choices to deal with the issue. My second point on this slide, our choices have transgenerational effects. Means that even our decisions in the past, our decisions today are going to have an effect on the residents of the town and the communities in the future. And so our choices today have ramifications for generations to come. And so we want to, as best as we can, make choices that are not the bane of some future tree warden or tree board or community that has to maintain those trees generations from now. Now, I will point out the third bullet item here is that, and there's certainly a context for the Midwest where we got hit pretty quick after, once Michigan got struck by EAB, Chicago area, Illinois followed 2 or 3, 4 years later in 2006. One benefit, if it can be called a benefit, is that while Vermont hasn't identified EAB yet, this is over 12 years now, where we've been more and more informed about EAB issues. And so an advantage for people in New England in general, and Vermont specifically, are that you've had more time to proactively think about how to address the issue, because you can live off the experiences of states in the Midwest and communities in the Midwest that have had to deal with the issue. In the Chicago area, the reaction to EAB was very, very much reactive. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that in that some communities chose to remove and replace trees. Some communities chose to chemically treat their trees, and quite a few do a combination of both. And all of them, in my view, are acceptable as long as they meet, community-defined long-term goals. Okay, so react to the immediate issue of the significant and severe infestation. Those were the choices that were available to these communities. And a state like Vermont and the communities in Vermont have had more time to digest, what problems other states and towns have run into, and maybe be able to more proactively approach the topic. So, sustaining any form of an ash population for the future requires choices that meet long-term community forestry system goals. And so one town's response to EAB may be very different from another town's. And as I said earlier, this is very acceptable. I mean, as long as thought has gone into what the long-term goals are for the community, and guidance from the state and other organizations. I think they're all acceptable. We're all still learning from it. So as I mentioned, specifically in Vermont, EAB affects really three groups of ash trees. The ones that are planted in our villages, towns, and cities. The naturally occurring ones along the rural roads. This is, you may recognize, that's North Royalton, and then I used to live on the larger rural road image here. That's Duger Road in Worcester, Vermont. And then the third area is the white and black ash that can be found in the town forests, town woodlands. They're a component of northern hardwood woodland systems. They're as an element of those woodland systems, losing them can have an effect on kind of the ecologic integrity of the individual town forests that are spread throughout the state. So I said earlier, the trees we manage today are a function of all past policies, and this image is one that you're seeing right now is a fairly common one, kind of pointing to. It's used pretty heavily to point out, that this particular community could have done something with chemical treatment, and that is certainly so if caught early enough, with the expense associated with it too. The current problem, as I pointed out earlier, with EAB is, in part, the failure to learn from Dutch elm disease. And this street view that you're seeing is a perfect example. Monoculture plantings, street after street of these trees, where we have fairly large populations of ash in some communities, at least in the Midwest. So in contrast, some communities that did learn at least a little bit more about diversification have felt less of an impact. What you're seeing here is the village of Oak Park, which is a suburb of Chicago, and all the ash on this street have been removed already. And so the effect on this street and other streets like it in Oak Park has been very, very much diminished, because on this particular block, you're actually looking at 11 different species of trees. And so it's a mixed deciduous urban forest that has probably no more than 5% of any one species typically can be found throughout the bulk of the town. And so this is an example of a community that used diversification in response to Dutch elm disease to really expand kind of the palette of species found in that community. And so one of the lessons I would hope that most of us would learn from it is that, the picture on the left is definitely, if caught soon enough and can afford it, there's mitigation through chemicals that could have dealt with the loss of all these trees. But to me, I'm an urban forestry policy person. I look at the big picture. The big picture in a small community could be 100 trees, but I look at the big picture of the community on the left, and I see that what were the mistakes that we, and I mean collectively, we as urban or community forestry managers, what mistakes did we make in the past that we could change so that we don't run into this issue again in the future? Professor John Ball this last year gave an interesting talk about how the real solution to emerald ash borer in the long term is very much diversification, and that's one I want everyone participating today to really think about. So the responses that any Vermont community selects to confront EAB are all necessarily reactive to the immediate crisis. As I pointed out earlier, though, you've had the benefit of time to think through this a lot more. I was delighted, surprised and delighted to see when I spoke at the Tree Stewards conference last fall, that how many towns in Vermont actually had EAB plans developed. That was really great to see, and in a state where the beetle hasn't even been identified yet. And so that's a very proactive approach, and the communities in the state should be lauded for it. So the smaller print between the two images here, you see a follow-up comment that I have, though, is that the challenge is making choices that support an economically sustainable system that maximizes at a generational level, remembering that our choices today have long-term effects, that maximizes the benefits to the community. And so the investment of time and resources on both chemical treatment and removals are going to be, and have been, a large burden on any town that has ash trees. But what I want towns to think about is, when the issue of EAB has passed, sometime in the future, how is the town positioned? Do you have a healthier urban forest as a result of your choices, or are you maintaining still an urban or community forest that has still a lot of needs associated with it? So this is the second thing I want communities to really think about and take to task. What are the choices that we can make that minimize costs, but also position the town to have a healthier urban and community forestry in the future. I'm going to come back to this image in a few slides, specifically about Vermont, and I want to show kind of the three stages of EAB management that occurred in Illinois. In 2002, this first stage, what I call is awareness, and that is, in 2002, EAB struck the Detroit area and across the river in Canada. And so for those 8 years, 2002 to 2010, in general, the communities became more and more aware and informed of what the issue was. And 2006 is when EAB was spotted or identified in Illinois, and it was 2009 and 10 when we really started seeing huge losses, initial losses of ash. That awareness really went through the roof. I mean, you can read about the problem in Michigan of EAB, but when you're finally experiencing it, that's where awareness really got down to the community level, to the individual person, understood the consequences of having ash in their community and in their yards. Stage two is decision making, and that's ran from 2008 through in northern Illinois through about 2012, 2013, where communities made decisions based on information from the state, the federal government, private practitioners, consultants like me, and based on their resources, understanding of their fiscal resources, and understanding of their ash population, they started making decisions on how they're going to approach the issue. Now, this is very different from Vermont in that 2008 and 2012, the state's already infested and with significant losses. And so this is what I mean by very, very reactive. Again, reactive in a positive way. There's a crisis, and we got to deal with it. And so a lot of decisions were made to contend with the issue as it was actually happening. And then stage 3 is called management, and that is the towns, now that they're almost all infested in the quarantine area in Illinois, which is probably 2/3 of the county now, or 2/3 of the counties in the state, is that most of the towns have decided on the direction they're going to take, whether it's remove, replace, chemical treatment, or a combination of both. And most of the technical outreach has diminished because it was done during the decision making stage, and now communities are just, they're contending with the issue based on how they decided to go, the direction they took. I'll come back to that in a minute, specifically on Vermont. We're currently doing a study of the 371 towns in the Chicago metro area. It may seem an odd statement to say that, that it's mostly urban, but there are actually the lower part of this graphic, very, very small rural communities of 400 or 500 people. And so right now we're doing a survey to see, now that you've made a choice on how you're going to contend with EAB, what choices did you make, and what are the costs associated with it, and things like that. I'll come back to that shortly. But this study is interesting in that while it deals with very, very heavy urban areas, there is a rural context to it that we can maybe draw some information from. This is a summary of some of the communities in that study area of what their total tree population was in 2014 when the survey was sent out, and what their ash population is. And what you can see here is that on the far right is really what I want you to focus on, is the percent of ash in the population. And that's pretty consistently, except for one community of Naperville, most of the community's ash populations ranged from 10 to 20%, hovering around 15% of their population. And that doesn't give you a lot of information. It gives you some information, but if you look at the ash population numbers, City of Des Plaines, 14% means they had 3,600 ash trees to deal with. So it's really the combination of the two pieces of information: how many ash and what's the percentage of the population that's ash. This, while it seems like a high number, hovering around 15%, when American elm was found in some of these towns, like Oak Park had 16,000 American elms in their streetscape. And so when Dutch elm disease hit the village of Oak Park, they had a percentage of elm hovering around 85%. And so I would just start getting into urban forestry at kind of the declining side of the losses of American elm in the late or early 80s. And I work in Oak Park a lot, and it really is amazing to see that while it's a headache dealing with these 2,400 ash trees in Oak Park, I can't even imagine would have been like to have to deal with 16,500 American elms. So the infestation is less than what we've had to deal with in the past. Now, there's a number of really good EAB benefit calculators out there. I'm going to transition from some of the discussion I've had just now to talk about some of the tools for evaluating the benefits. You know, why do we want to keep ash? And there's very good reasons to keep some ash in our towns. And so I'm going to talk about these cost-benefit calculators that are out there and how they can be applied usefully in your communities for kind of gauging, you know, the benefits of this resource. And then I'll transition into discussion on Vermont-specific points. This cost calculator called EAB Plans is developed by Rich Hauer at the University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point, and then there's a second one through Purdue University, and we use both, and I think they're great tools. I will point out there are some preloaded variables. If you're going to use the cost calculators, you want to carefully kind of massage the preloaded variables for your context. Otherwise, I think it gives there's some what I feel are instrument bias in the formulas. So, and some of the issues are removal costs, expected treatment, success, species ratings, and replanting rates. And I'm just going to cover this real quick, just to kind of give you a sense to make them useful tools for you to make sure that you massage the variables to provide a context that's valuable for you and the town that you work in or work for. First off, the removal, go back one. The removal costs that you're seeing there, $31.90. When we applied it to a bid situation, at least in the Chicago area, we found that $31.90 was about 3 times the average per inch removal cost in the Chicago area. And so it's really important that you adjust the removal costs. Your removal costs may be higher, for all I know. But in the Chicago area, the average inch diameter cost to remove a tree is a little under $11. So, and you can see there's a significant difference in calculating removal costs if that number is adjusted. The second is that EAB Plans assumes a success rate of 99% regardless of the condition of the tree. And it doesn't allow you to, the options are you're going to treat everything or not treat. And there's good reasons. It's kind of showing the extreme costs involved with the trees that you're managing. But the reality is that you're looking in this table at the just under 1,600 trees in the village of Oak Park, and the condition distribution. Well, if you treated the trees in poor, very poor, dead condition, you would probably not get much, if any, of a success rate from them. And so what we did with this table is calculate what the real success rate would be based on our current tree population, and in this case, it would be 35% instead of the 99%. That's not a realistic number in a way because you won't be, hopefully, you won't be treating trees in poor, very poor condition. But the model doesn't allow you to differentiate. So the tree you're seeing on the right is actually a treated tree, and it was treated the year before this photo was taken. So we advocate for treatment, but when it's appropriate. And these trees are too far gone. They more than likely should not have been subjected to treatment, an investment of money to treat them. The second thing is, in conjunction with that, is to be successful, the trees being treated must be at least in good or better condition. This is also a treated tree, green ash. The treatment tags there, and this tree is in a condition that, again, did not warrant treatment, and in my view was a complete waste of money for the town to be treating it. It's also, you have to be, if you're going to be treating, make sure you're treating an ash tree. You're looking at a treatment tag on a calorie a pear, which hopefully will not get emerald ash borer in the future because of the treatment. But if you're going to be doing treatment, you want to make sure that the conditions of the trees are of a level that allows for good success, good investment of the money, so the survival rates can be maintained well. The last thing on the cost benefit programs are that the species rating in EAB plans is listed at 70%, and that's really, really high for an ash today. The species rating is based on a species' current overall quality as a plantable species. Issues with the ash genus include now they have to be artificially maintained, chemical treatment. They're not typically, at least in Illinois, they're not available in nurseries. I would guess that they're not readily available in New England anymore either. And they now have a significant pest issue. So Illinois, we changed the species rating to 20% rather than 70%. If you leave it at 70%, it inflates the benefit value of the tree. So when we plug, again, massaging the variables in the cost-benefit program, we use Oak Park as an example. We found that no significant difference between the cost-benefit between treatment and replace. Okay, and so it doesn't give. It's kind of gives for the Village of Oak Park gives a very neutral presentation on whether to treat or remove. And so that last line I have in the slides, a very important one, is that the decision to treat becomes a management decision rather than an economic one. And what I mean by management is that if the town that have a cultural or ecologic or historic significance, or you have an avenue of significant trees, say white ash in good condition, it's a town decision to preserve them, and I think that's admirable and should be pursued. That's what I mean by a management decision, is that we base the decision to treat or remove a tree based on the contribution of those trees to the community from an ecologic, historic, and cultural perspective. But also is that if we don't treat, they're all going to be gone. And so we've set targets of about 3% of the total tree population. If you want them to be ash represented in the population in the future, certainly set manageable targets of what number do you want left in the community after EAB is passed. And those are management decisions. They're not based on injecting every single tree and hoping and having maybe a larger than manageable ash population once EAB is passed. And so we firmly advocate for identifying target numbers of trees to preserve that are economically feasible to sustain. So The last comment on that is we're finding communities that have treated heavily in the Chicago area have started to drop off the number of trees that they're treating because they didn't, in my view, pick sustainable target numbers. It's easier to treat 10 trees or 100 trees over 10 or 20 years than it is to sustain 1,000 trees over 20 years. You know, picking something that is sustainable for your resources is critical. So before we move into the Vermont specific discussion, is that there's opportunities here too with emerald ash borer. Ash removals have provided, at least in some communities, an opportunity to increase the distance between newly planted trees. The following long-term benefits are realized. Trees take on a form unique to the species. Large crown spread, or a larger crown spread is realized. And so the environmental and possibly aesthetic benefits are maximized. Lower maintenance costs over time because you have less crowding and less deadwood. The trees typically are longer lived, and then there's reduced storm damage. And so there's a lot of good environmental and economic reasons for using this opportunity to redefine spacing between trees in populated areas and towns. The picture you're looking at is a green ash is on the right, and that's actually American elm on the left. And the green ash was presumably planted in anticipation of losing that American elm. Well, the American elm is still there, and look what happens. Look what happened to that ash tree. That's on a 25-foot center. And if the American elm does die from, say, Dutch elm disease next year, what do you have left? You have the tree on the right, which has diminished crown. Its contribution environmentally and aesthetically is very much reduced. And so by increasing the spacing that allows aerial space for crown development is an important opportunity for communities that are rethinking their planting strategies. Species diversity, as I mentioned, Professor Ball has strongly suggested that a response to things like emerald ash borer in the long term are going to be about how we contend with species diversity. And so I'll use Oak Park again as an example, is that they've planted over 2,600 trees since 2006, and this has represented over 31 different species. So those they removed about 1,500 ash trees so far. And so one or two species of ash, green and white and some blue and black, but mostly green and white, have now been replaced by a wide range of very high quality species. What you're seeing here is a swamp white oak on the right and a silver linden on the left. It's also, at this point, time for our profession to refine our understanding of species diversity. That formula of 10, 20, 30 is very much outdated, in my view. You have 10% ash, and it's still going to be a huge headache for most communities. So the 10% species, 20% genus, 30% family. What I try to get towns to think about is planting, developing species targets that are based on how much, what percentage of trees can you afford to lose? And that's really a function of your budget and resources. And what it ends up being is that even a high quality species in the Midwest, like the swamp white oak, long-lived, low maintenance, large crown, things like that, you don't plant more than 3 to 5% of that species as at maximum, and so picking target percentages that are far lower than what we've kind of been used to in the past. So other opportunities, and this is certainly something that's a greater opportunity for Vermont communities is that you're looking at two wood projects that we were involved with. That the round table is a kind of a Frank Lloyd Wright design that we used to develop. Those are street tree ash trees were milled to make that table. And then there's a butcher block table that's wheelchair accessible for a grade school classroom. And that's also made out of ash from a street tree. The problem in the Chicago area is that we very much lack mills to get wood too, and so finding partners to develop this pretty large biomass of urban wood into upgraded lumber for furniture and stuff is really, really quite difficult. So in Vermont, the potential is greater for identifying partnerships and volume markets. I'm shocked to see that, for example, in the Chicago area, there's quite a large industry of pallet industry and also decking for trucks, yet virtually no ash or elm that we're still removing is being diverted to those mills, which to me seems a crime. So the wood utilization element of EAB is certainly something that states and communities that are more traditionally geared for wood use and lumber production can take advantage of. So the eventual goal of an EAB management strategy is to develop a healthier, more diverse urban or community forest. This can certainly include preserving a sustainable portion of the ash population. Most Chicago area communities opted for the remove replace strategy. Communities that have chosen to include chemical treatment can serve to inform our understanding of the viable outcomes of including this option, and that's very, very important. And then just some final observations on chemical treatment is that I think I was pretty clear on this earlier, is that target a sustainable quantity of the ash population to treat. It must meet long-term urban forestry goals. Involve the community in the dialogue. Treat trees that have the greatest potential to survive. Inform residents of credible treatment providers. I'm a board member of the Illinois Arborists Association, and there are a large number of very reputable, good, excellent tree care companies providing treatment, and we advocate their use. But with the influx of emerald ash borer, also came an influx of companies that personally they had a lot of questionable ethics behind them. So definitely support local companies that provide this service. Initiate a town-directed contract price for residents is a potential option for Vermont communities. Is that while the town may or may not be doing treatment, they can certainly work with local contractors to get an injection or a treatment price that can be provided to residents at a lower rate than if the individual resident treated on their own. So I go back to this slide on management in Vermont, and awareness again has started with when it first struck in 2002, and it's going through today still. The more rural the town, the more it's more difficult it is to get information out to these communities. But you certainly, as I pointed out, have a lot more time in order to have developed this awareness. And but witnessed by the different EAB plans I saw last fall in Vermont, the decision-making processes has been going on and is still going on, and that's great. And then at some point, when and if EAB comes to Vermont, then implementing those plans. some towns may be removing ash right now in anticipation of their loss. And that's why I have 2013 on. So these stages definitely emphasize that in Vermont communities, you've had more time to understand and process the issues that have confronted other states and communities in those states. So the preparation in Vermont is very much informed at every level. Individuals, elected officials, town staff have to be clearly, informed on what the issue is and the significance of it to the individual town. This is an image of Worcester and the highway map for Worcester, and it's a small town. It's 2 or 3 villages, and but everyone in that community has a role to play in addressing EAB, and so informing at every level is important. Understand the ash resource at the 3 levels found in Vermont. The town of Worcester, for example, in the village, has a very low number of ash trees. Actually, the last time I was there, I couldn't find any. The rural roads certainly have ash, and the town forest certainly has ash. So understand the ash resource at the 3 levels found in your community is very, very important. Not only the number, but sizes and volume. Okay. Reinforce firewood message. Most of the transfer of EAB in the Midwest has been almost exclusively, not exclusively, but very closely tied to main road routes. And so we think the transfer of firewood out of the quarantine areas has helped move the bug along faster. And then develop objective-driven action plan. And what I mean by objective-driven is not that, in management plans you can see a goal or objective like increase species diversity. Well, that's nice. That's a nice goal. But how do you achieve it? So what I mean by objective-driven is what are you going to do, who's going to do it, when are you going to do it, and what are the tangible outcomes from it. So Gould Hill Road, the road in Worcester I lived on, as an example. Gould Hill Road will be inspected every 2 years for risk trees and the condition of ash. Okay, so that's very much an objective-driven action. It has a time frame, and additional details need to be written around it, but objective-driven defines what you're going to do, who's going to do it, and what time frame it's going to be accomplished in. Treatment in Vermont. Identify sustainable numbers in population centers. I would guess that if any treatment occurs, it would more than likely be happening in the villages and towns and not on the rural roads or in the town forest. So identify a number that's sustainable over a long period of time. To inject for 3 years and then stop because the use of resources was too much for the town. It's a good lesson to learn, but if you pick a sustainable number that maybe treatment could occur for 10 years on even a half a dozen trees, those are going to be 10 high-quality ash trees that may survive this current crisis. And again, focus on trees in good or better condition. Start once the insect has been identified in the state. I would certainly advocate that if communities or individuals are treating now, it makes sense to just be cognizant of the cost. Illinois got struck by EAB, and it really wasn't until 3 or 4 years later that we start really getting the high volume of losses. So while it may be identified in Vermont in the next year or two, it may take a very, very long time for it to really affect the population. Removals. In population centers, begin removing ash in poor or worse condition. Identify the capacity of the road crews. What's the largest size the road crew can take out and the volume they can deal with. jurisdiction. This is State Route 12 in the image. Partner with other agencies to deal with ash that may affect your roads, but are technically managed by another agency. So working with the AOT and the county on mutual projects to eliminate dead or dying ash trees. Training in efficient and safe felling techniques and coordination. So increasing staff capacity to deal with the trees out there. Manage the risk. Don't overreact to it. As Elise pointed out, a lot of the work I do is in risk management and risk assessments. And while there's initial fear that a standing dead ash tree is going to fall over and hit something, the reality is that, for the first year an ash is dead, you may get a lot of smaller branches, 2 to 3 inches in diameter, coming out of the tree, but you don't see really significant size limbs or tree failure till 2 or 3 years after, typically, after the tree's been dead. Doesn't mean ignore it, but don't keep it in context, okay? And then on rural roads, develop a 5 to 10 year removal schedule for ash in poor or worse condition. Understand target zones. The ash trees that are closer to the road have a higher likelihood of dropping a branch and hitting a target than a tree that may be 20 feet back, where the crown doesn't reach out over the road. The trees closer to the road have a higher likelihood of a dead branch failing in the road than one further away. That makes common sense, but it also allows you to prioritize what trees may come out first. Contract specifications allow towns to get tighter control over the cost of the removals. I mentioned the average per inch price in the Chicago area is about $11 an inch. That's over all sizes of ash trees. We have bids that come in at $7.50 per inch up to a 20-inch tree. So the tighter your contract specifications and the more broad number of contractors you have bidding, the more control you have over that pricing. Cooperative contracts between multiple towns is that very much to control costs of removals is having neighboring or adjoining towns work together on a cooperative removal contract with 1 or 2 firms. That way, the greater volume of trees in the contract shared by these multiple towns should be able to lower the cost of removal substantially. Wood utilization. I'll keep it brief, but firewood and lumber is very much alternatives, but this goes back to informing the residents of the town. Firewood use on site is perfectly fine. Traveling with it is not. And so their participation in the appropriate use of firewood as the debris from these removals is paramount. My last slide is on plantings. It's an opportunity to diversify. Only you in the state, at the state level down to the community level, can decide what with. What works in that, from southern down in Brattleboro up to Burlington. What are the different ranges of species that can be tried out and planted in our communities. It's also, as I pointed out, an opportunity to site replacement trees at appropriate distances to maximize the long-term health and contribution to the community. I think I've covered that one enough. So my last slide is really on, EAB. While it's definitely a pain in the neck to deal with, it does provide us the opportunities missed with Dutch elm disease to better inform our profession in arboricultural care and managing community forest systems for long-term benefits. And I really want to just close with, keep the issue in context. Is that ash are a great species, specifically, white ash is a landscape tree, and I advocate that at least in Vermont, if the resources allow for it, that you try to preserve some in the population, and that's a strategic decision at the community level. But it's also, I view disasters like this definitely as opportunities, because we're here for a very short time, and most of the town trees that we plant are going to be here years after we're gone. We're managing 300-year-old bur oaks right now. And I think about that all the time, is that our choices today affect generations into the future. And I would just want to make sure, and I hope I encourage people here, is that we make the right decisions so that we're not someone in the future, a headache for someone in the future by our choices today. So I'm going to stop there and see if there's any questions. Elise?
Yeah.
You want to take it from here?
Sure. Thank you, Mark. I have a couple of questions that come in over the course of your chat. A couple of them are pretty, I think you'd be able to hit pretty quickly. The first is just a clarifying question to make sure those graphs that you were showing from working in the Chicago area, those towns, those were all trees on public land, not private, correct?
That is correct. Yep.
Okay, so we're just talking about publicly owned trees. Private trees are not managed by the town.
Right.
Okay, so the second question is, are some species of ash trees more resistant to EAB than others?
What we found was that the one that gets hit initially the hardest is green ash, and I think most of the literature supports that. We're still looking at, in a couple towns that we work in, where they've been heavily infested for the last 5 years and removed half their ash trees. We still have white ash untreated that visually look in excellent condition. I mean, we just re-inventoried them and we rated them as excellent. And so the white ash seem to do better. They will get infested eventually, so untreated. Blue ash, which is it's a beautiful tree, seem to be a little bit more resistant, but from what we've been seeing, I haven't experienced that. They're starting to look pretty bad. So white ash is the one that's the focus species.
Great, and this is kind of associated with that question. There was a question that came in. Do the cost-benefit calculators address the possibility that there are native trees growing that may be resistant to EAB, and if we remove them preemptively, we've lost that genetic diversity?
That's a great question. I don't think the cost calculators define that. I mean, that is one concern, and it's specific to Vermont, is that, when you're talking about the rural roads and the town forest, is that you are actually dealing with, naturally occurring trees, and their loss would be, and that the gene pool from them would be a significant issue, as opposed to the cultivars that are typically planted in the towns. But no, they don't really address that. To me, that's a management. That's a key, I think, intuitive understanding of the trees that you're managing, is that if you have that understanding of the significance of those trees in the population, then you make management choices to try and preserve them. Mm-hmm. It could end up being pretty costly if you're talking about a town forest. But.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you. Question, I think you kind of got to this in some of your last slides, but how can the urban forestry approaches for communities translate to the large areas of privately held forests in rural Vermont communities?
Boy, that's a tough one. It's I guess the context I can give is once the Chicago area got infested, this is still a kind of a public sector landowner, but the Cook County Forest Preserve is an 80,000 acre woodland system. And by state law, they don't. It's kind of weird, but they don't allow harvesting at all in the Forest Preserve. But the Forest Preserve sadly can't manage. Just in the last 2 years, it's been hit really heavily with EAB, and so all they're doing is removing the trees, cutting them down, and in a lot of cases just leaving them. And I, personally, I think it's sad to see that. They're dealing with it mostly from a risk perspective, but there's certainly a large volume of this wood that or trees that they're experiencing loss right now that with some forethought could have been used in a more kind of managed way, better use than just cutting them all down. On private land holdings in Vermont, I mean, the similarity is that once once the borer strikes a state, it does take 3 or 4 years, I think, for it to really get it to visibly see the negative effects on it. And the reality is that whether it's a town forest or a private woodland, depending on how far north the bug goes, you're going to lose those trees. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know if there's a market for focusing on managing those trees more actively now in anticipation of it. I'm reluctant to suggest that because you don't know the context of how heavily infested Vermont will become. We can guess that it's going to be heavily infested, but that's still conjecture.
Right. Well, and the last question I have for you, Mark, is the asker, Linda Morse. I will send you some resources, but I'm curious, Mark, if you have any leads on good information for private landowners on helping them manage maybe some of these more rural parcels.
Yeah, I'm actually I've never been asked this question in the last one. We certainly work with private landowners on it. I'll see what I can get from some of the DNR work here mm-hmm. and in Wisconsin, and send it off to you, Elise, and see if you can forward it on to people.
Sure, we'll do.
And if maybe, Elise, if that person or persons have more specific details they can convey to you that you can send me, I'd appreciate it.
Yep, absolutely.
I could give maybe a more straightforward question or a statement. So
great.
I will say one thing, a quick comment, Elise, that for towns for chemical treatment and when you're talking about private homeowners and landowners, it definitely is. The average price around the Chicago area $6.50 an inch, and that's manageable for at least a few trees for residents in some towns and stuff. But we have seen, and this is what I mean by working with your local contractors, because we have seen people literally coming in from out of state, setting up kind of what I think are shell companies, and they're charging as much as $22 an inch, and that's not affordable. And they'll do one treatment. The homeowner thinks it's a cure-all, like only one treatment is required, and that the company's gone then. So they made their money and they left. And so it really is important that, as a group, from the state on down, that that there's understanding that there are inexpensive routes for chemical treatment, and they should be advocated for. But that locally, local companies are emphasized, and that towns have some control over that by maybe controlling, not controlling, but at least getting bids for residential properties, like helping facilitate that pricing, so that people private residents and even towns that choose to do chemical treatment aren't being abused by the handful of people that are taking advantage of this kind of problem. So.
Great. Well, thank you, Mark. Definitely, I think I was scribbling notes the whole time, so lots for us to think about at the state level, but also I'm hoping that all the participants got a lot out of this as well. So thank to you again. To those of you who are still on the call, just wanted to remind you that this webinar has been recorded, so it'll be on our website, vtcommunityforestry.org. By early next week. And before we sign off, just a reminder to please fill out the evaluation survey that will be sent to you immediately after this. And thanks to everyone who sat in on the call, and we hope to see you at one of our 2016 webinars next spring. All right, have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Elise.
Thanks, Mark.